architect doesn't describe anymore who we are. We had kind of an identity crisis. You say like, I'm an architect, but, and then you kind of start explaining a little bit complicated what you're doing. And then we came up with that word identity architect.
Hi, I'm Jack, and this is HubTalks, a series of intimate conversations with pioneers from the world of architecture and design. Today I'm joined by Peter Ippolito to discuss his work with identity architecture. Peter, welcome to Copenhagen. Great to see you. And perhaps we could just start with you giving me a little bit more background in terms of how you founded Ippolito Fleitz Group and a little bit about your quite interesting route towards becoming an architect, which, as far as I understand, isn't perhaps the typical route. You have many experiences from other fields, which of course make you the person you are today. So perhaps we could start by going a little bit back in time.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I think the whole career was always based on an idea of being curious about the world and about yourself and what you're going to do with your life, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I was finishing school, I pretty much had no idea what I'm going to do with my life. There were many options. I thought I could be anything, but what? I had no idea. So I was like taking 4 or 5 years of just trying things out, and kind of instinctively, I guess I tried out things which I was afraid of, which were not part of my upbringing. So I was working on a construction site. I was did my civil service and put myself in a context which was not familiar to me. I did a little bit of advertising. I became a wine dealer. Then I kind of ran away because my father thought I'm going to do wine dealership or something. And that was the last thing I wanted to do. So I went to Paris and lived there. And then within Paris, I kind of started sketching and thinking about architecture. And that was the moment when I moved to architecture. And I really value that time a lot, because it was a moment of deep learning, and without constraints, without putting any kind of framework in front of you. And I think that's pretty much what we kind of try to maintain in the way how we are running our business as well.
So when you say that, you mean the feeling you had arriving in Paris, or the decision to pursue architecture? Or is it a combination, perhaps?
Well, there's two things. I think one is, I guess you have like these kind of turning moments in your life, right? And arriving in the morning with the night train at 6 o'clock or whatever in Paris at the train station Gare de l'Est, and not knowing what you're going to do with your life. And you know that you have money for like a week and everything is open. You literally don't know what's going to come next. I think that was an interesting moment for me, which was very, very liberating, because you learn that you can do it. And then that you can kind of cross all the fears you absolutely have, of course. You're kind of safe because I always can go to a hotel, but you're going to do that 5 days and then you have to go back. You didn't want to do that, right? And so to succeed that and to overcome that kind of hesitation or concerns, I think was always a big driver, which kind of liberated, because, we have these moments, or we had these moments in our career quite often, that you are in front of a task which is way out of your league.
Absolutely.
And you just go for it.
Yeah.
And that was always good. So I kind of learned that courage always works out for me.
It's fascinating. This is the impression I've seen many of. I've been reading a lot about the projects you've been working on, and in fact, the two themes that popped out for me were curiosity as one, because obviously you have this hunger to experience. Clearly, this comes across in so many ways, and it's interesting you talk about courage as well, because it takes courage to be curious sometimes. In a sense. The other thing that really sort of springs to mind when I sort of look across the types of projects you've done and the way you've approached them is this kind of generosity, which I think is an interesting theme, because what it reveals about you as a person is that you encounter as much as you can, and then you're able to respond to it and give something back and contribute, which really must be the key role of any architect or anybody dealing with people. This is, I'm not sure if this resonates with you. And I suppose what I'm interested to hear is whether this kind of period of your life where you were sort of experimenting with different, identities perhaps, whether this became a catalyst for the identity architecture you work with today.
Certainly, absolutely. All these kind of moments you have, and then later in my studies at university and in Germany as well as in Chicago, all these kind of encounters kind of shape who you are.
Yes.
But I think the interesting thing is that the moment you make these decisions, they don't feel like you're having courage. It's not a courageous decision.
No. It's only with
just
hindsight
something
that you realize.
Yeah, exactly.
That, yeah.
Just throw yourself in, and that's like you do that more like by instinct or something. So I would not call myself courageous at all.
No.
Like not at all. Right? But I'm perhaps naive enough sometimes to just go for it. Right. Because I always think, what could happen? Yeah. I think besides getting an experience, and if you fail, that's a good experience too. Yeah. So I like that situation, to throw myself in. I don't think twice, because if I start thinking twice, I might not do it.
So don't overthink things.
No, that's not me.
Yeah, that's fascinating. But carrying on from that theme, then, at what point did you? Because your ambition as a group is very broad. The fact that you're working with communication design, with branding, with product design, and it sort of exists within multiple disciplines. Was that an intention from the start?
Yes. I loved architecture coming out of university. I felt that life is way too interesting to only look at from that perspective. Yeah. And so within my studies, my first projects in school was a collaboration with a landscape architect. Second project was a collaboration between an artist, a doctor, a writer, and myself. So I always was looking out for these kind of interdisciplinary moments, because I always thought it's really interesting to bring these perspectives in, and I thought that make my project much richer. So when we started business, which was literally right after my diploma, we thought, there's a mixture between like the ambition you might get, or like the perspective of you being able to do everything as an architect, at least in my generation, like you kind of, can do it all, kind of thing. But the openness to embrace all these other disciplines. So we started the multi-disciplinary studio, a lot, doing it myself. I was coding websites at that point, and and that was a good moment. And of course that grew now. So today we have all these disciplines, like specialists much better than me in the house.
Yes.
But we like that situation, whether it's people within our studio or whether we embrace people from outside, to bring people into the projects and broaden our perspective, our knowledge base, our expertise in understanding what people are doing with their lives.
Yeah. And what does that look like? I know you have offices in two in Germany and one in China. Yeah. And that must present its own group of challenges when you're working cross-continent, and also being able to maintain, because it's one thing to be an identity architect, but I think with that in mind, obviously there must be a very diverse group of clients that you're working with very different expectations about what identity means. And what I'd like to hear more about is, to what extent are you reflecting identity from your clients, and to how much extent can you form new identities? Because this is obviously, when you're working globally, there must be, you have to be very sensitive, presumably in some instances, to be able to respond and to say, okay, we can reimagine the essence of who you are.
Perhaps we'll go back a little bit. I think when we started business, and that's still for us today, we made a couple of decisions more or less intuitively. One is to work from various perspectives. Second, not to be specialized, to be maximum open to whatever comes to us. As long as it sounds kind of interesting and ethical, suitable, we were like up to doing it. Third, to not sell our style or our language or our preferences, because it's not about us. It's because it's about the person in front of us, or the user, right? So we are very, very consequently, developing our projects from a user perspective. The work we're doing is fundamentally rooted in a belief of a diverse portfolio in a very kind of multifaceted world. So we very early on, like pretty much after 3 months when we started the studio, we had our first project in China, because somebody called us. And I think I always believe that if you're open for things, then things coming to you, right? And that always worked out for us. So we always try to challenge our own culture in mirroring it on other cultures. We always enjoyed the moment to go somewhere else to see whether our kind of responses, which kind of are part of our cultural background, are valid, or how do they kind of transform in a different kind of background? So yes, you bring your expertise, but yeah, you listen. And it's not about bringing our this is the way how I'm doing it. It's like more kind of a conversation between people. And that's, I think, the way we like to design in general. It's more like a conversational kind of moment in always being open to learn from the person or the entity which is in front of you. And of course, you'll bring something to the table. And I like to see my projects, if it's a good project, we both don't know how it ends.
Which is the beauty of a
so this is like how you want to do a project, so you don't know where this is going to go, if you have the answer in your head already, it's kind of okay, sometimes that needs to be done as well, but the beautiful projects are the projects which you go on a journey with, it's like a conversation which takes you somewhere. The idea calling ourselves identity architects kind of came after a couple of years of working, where we kind of felt that architect doesn't describe anymore who we are. We had kind of an identity crisis. In fact, if somebody, what are you doing? You'll say like, I'm an architect, but, and then you kind of start explaining a little bit complicated what you're doing. And then we came up with that word identity architect, because it kind of occurred to us that that's at the core of what we're doing, and we like that idea of identity a lot, in as much as it is a fluid understanding of a constant reflection of who you think you are and what the world around you thinks who you are, right? And to bring that to a match is a moment which is interesting. So identity always is fluid and always changes. Now, we as architects, we're not fluid creators of fluid things. We're building something, and so this is an interesting conversation between something which has a totally different timeline, something which has a much, is even more in the age of discussing sustainability, of something which has a value for a long time, and must be able to kind of embrace all these different ideas of identity of you as a company, of you as a person, if it's like a residential or if it's like a corporate identity, which is always changing. And we always enjoyed that kind of moment. And so it's not defining, our job is not to create an identity per se. We do that in branding, but even there, you try to create identities which are not stable. Because
everything, life is dynamic.
Like, you're not stable, right? You're always in a constant process of redefining who you are.
Change, of course.
Exactly. So we create a framework, let's say. We create a framework, a stage, whatever you want to call it, where people or entities or corporations or governments or whatever we work for, kind of feel comfortable in doing whatever they need to do, right? So I'm not going to control that. I'm not going to determine that. I try to give as much room for that, but in a framework which hopefully has a value system which is deeply rooted in the entity or my user or my client or whatever, and which gives them a framework which is not just style or good looking or whatever, but it has a deep connection to their kind of existence, whatever. It sounds a little bit too big, but
I mean, this is hugely inspiring to think in these terms, because really you're designing potential. You're giving these companies, individuals, through your approach, the potential for things to happen without defining the things that do happen. And again, I think this, and I know you've talked a lot about the space in between things, perhaps the space in between ideas in itself, or the space in between identity and place, or physical and abstract elements. And I think this brings to my mind another theme that I think that you work very successfully with, which is collage. This idea of being able to place objects, ideas, structures within environments to allow people to respond to arrive with their own context, culture, memories, this kind of thing. And I think that's eye-opening. To my mind, this is being able to work multidisciplinary, but also multimedia. And what I'd like to ask you really is how that looks when you think about a collage of the senses. So you have a project which, in some way, needs to present opportunities for the user. But how does that? How do you create balance within a collage of a living environment, and an environment that which can evolve, because this is, as we say, the change is the only constant. So how can you, I'm fascinated to hear what that looks like, how you can bring these different sensory feelings together in harmony.
The projects we're doing, on one hand, have a quite clear idea of user journeys, right? So there's an idea of how people might perceive the space. We don't force them into that, but we have a good knowledge about how people kind of use space, because we're deep into the what are people doing in our spaces kind of situation. So this is like, as I said, always user perspective. On the other hand, we always like the idea of an open narration, of an openness of, we don't like that word storytelling so much, because it kind of forces you into a story you want to communicate. And I might be interested, I might be not. There's a good chance I'm going to be bored, or it doesn't be relevant for me. So what I'm trying to do is we create. That's what you call collage is one tool for that. We create moments, and there can be physical moments, things you see. There can be things which are sensual, like acoustic or light or olfactory, which trigger memories, meaning, and since one thing and the other thing might have contradicting meaning, you in the user's head, you make the bridge, and so it becomes your space because you connect it with something which belongs to you. So I don't control it, right? So yes, you tell a story, but in a much more abstract way. And every user kind of takes away whatever they want to take with them, but the story they make up themselves rather than you telling them the story they have to take away with.
Which presumably creates ownership for the user.
Exactly, and that's what it's about. At the end, it's always about to create moments, moments which are worth to remember, so they create a value for you. Because we believe if we don't manage to create something of value for the user, don't do it. It doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah. It's not just like there and you use it, whatever. You want to create something which kind of resonates in people using it in a qualitative difference level, whether it's like a personal space, a corporate space, or a governmental space, right? But so sensory space, kind of creates this kind of moments which obviously communicate to each other, and you create an idea of a rhythm, how you use a space, how you create density, wideness, acoustic density, openness, etc. But that's only like an offer, What people are going to do with it, how they're going to use it. Hey, you always learn.
That's their choice.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I kind of compare it like you go to a good party, right? And at a good party, you meet interesting people and you have good conversations, right? And that's how I kind of like to see my spaces, right? It's like you create interesting characters, and they have good conversations, and you join in, and you choose whom you're going to talk to and what's so, and that creates an openness not only in narration but in use as well. It's open to interpretation. Use it this, like that or like that, and of course that's a development. How we design, coming from a classic architectural kind of education where you train to design something, like an object. And today we come to realization that yes, of course, this is still our job, but it's even more, or at least as important, to design processes, to design the space in between objects, right? Okay, yeah. So the relationship of things. Not designing the relationships, though. That's up to the user.
That's the job of the user.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But to give space for relationships. So we kind of give a framework for relationships, So life happens between objects. And so, yes, we're designing the objects, but the core of the thing is what happens in between them. And I like that.
The other impression, hearing you talk about this as well, I get the impression that you're quite provocative with the way you do this from time to time. With the contrast between objects, with the contrast between materials, with the contrast between textures. There are the images I've seen of some film has had this very sort of. It illustrates perfectly what you're describing here. This placement of triggers, in a sense, that creates a potential. And to what extent are you deliberately provoking people within this field? Because obviously you start with a conversation with a client. They have what they believe to be or perceive to be their fundamental values. But what I get the impression you sometimes respond with, or often respond with, is to challenge that start point, and perhaps to lead them somewhere where they didn't know they needed to be or needed to go, or to perhaps, this is obviously the role of an architect in any context is to be able to respond to a brief. But I'm interested to think how far you can push this, or whether you have some examples where you've really been able to challenge a client in terms of their brief.
The first thing, of course, is always to carefully listen to a client, and take it seriously. And of course, that goes along with, and that's the beauty of our job, or at least of our setup. I'm in a very privileged situation to pretty much every week meet a new idea of how to conduct a life or how to run a business, globally. And that's really interesting because it kind of creates a mosaic of ideas, and so I believe we are a good partner to kind of challenge ideas because we saw a lot and we can relate it to other things we saw, we like that. The next thing is to understand it. Then you might want to forget it because you only want to create the essence of it rather than kind of follow all these ideas and things because they're coming from, if you're working for yourself, they're coming from a tunnel of dependencies. I have to do this because of that and la la la. And, the privilege of the view from outside is to not being bothered of all of that. You have to understand it, but you're able to cut through. That's why you bring somebody from outside. And if you don't take that privilege, you lose an energy in the project. We start all of our projects with a rigorous analysis. And we're really, really good and take a lot of time to really understand on every level what the challenge really is. And that brings us in a position that we can have a good dialogue with our clients to make them understand that they might have to readjust their idea or the dream might not match the space or whatever the problem is. And that, funnily enough, or not funnily enough, is a magic moment because we've been maximal honest to our client, and sometimes it hurts. Just telling them, look, your dream doesn't fit into that space, and you're taking over a building, and we can manage to do something interesting out of it, but it's not what you're dreaming of because the space as it is built in which you build, that's even worse. It's just not suitable for that, right? Yeah. Whatever, there's a moment of truth in it, and that typically creates trust. In a very rare moment, they kind of don't like you anymore because they think, who's this person to tell me that, that's not a good start point or I'm hoo-hoo. Typically, it creates trust. Okay. And without trust, you're not going to do a good project. And the more trust you have, the more you can kind of go for an interesting idea, and how far you can go, there is no value in itself in being, obviously there's an ambition you have as a designer. There might not be the ambition of your client. We have a lot of projects which might not be, let's say, the award-winning design projects, but they're super, super, super successful because they're relevant to our client. And that's as far as they could go in that moment, coming from somewhere else. And for them, it's a huge step ahead. And of course, you as a designer, you think, we could have done this and this and this and this. It doesn't matter. For them, it's super successful. And it's stretched the canvas as much as they could stretch it. If you go further, you lose them. You lose the user. Yes. You don't want to do that, because it's not about you, it's about them. So I think, and with other clients, you can go miles, and you can just Do
you have an example then, with these sort of perhaps more hidden examples? Or?
Well, I don't want to go for specific examples, but like in the workspace environment, yes. As I said, change management is an integral part of designing a successful workplace. And of course, you can design whatever you want. It's not going to be successful if it's not rooted deeply in the corporate culture. No. So every company starts somewhere and they have a dream about what they want to be. This is the start quite often for misunderstanding because they think it's about offering like an open plan office or something like that. And then they'll have a lot of clients say, we did all that for our employees, but they're still not coming. Yeah. And you say, yeah, sure, they're not coming because it's not reflecting in how you organization is culturally set, right? So it's all it's a holistic kind of thing. So there's a good example. You have a lot of projects, where it's not a wild project in aesthetics, It is a more careful kind of project, but it's super successful for them because it takes time. That's hurtful because we all want to move quick and do things, like we have energy to, but we all know that from the development of our own, our studio, every change you do, of course, in my head, it's done if I make a decision, right? Yeah. But there's like a whole group of people which you have to take along with yourself, and you make the same mistakes like your client does the mistakes because that's part of the game, right? Mm-hmm. But change takes time because we're human. So it's not good to overdo it. It's if you go too fast with one end, you might lose the other one. And so there's a good share of examples where you can win something. On one hand, you're doing a successful project, successful you as a designer, but you lost the client. not lost the client in terms of economy, but lost the client in terms of
Buy-in or
culture.
whatever, yeah.
I think a successful project kind of manages to understand that relationship.
Okay.
And understand. You need to have a gut feeling for how far can you go with your client? How much can you stretch it? And of course, you want to stretch it as far as you want, but there's a limit to it. And then you have to say, okay, no, I think it's wrong. You have to step back a little bit and take that transitional moment. And perhaps the next one is then the one where you end up where you need to be.
Endless learning process.
Exactly.
Yeah. Many of your clients end up being allies, and that in itself, of course, referrals are crucial in terms of expanding the studio and being able to have a good reputation. But this must be a challenge when you are, I guess, intentionally rejecting a sort of style. I mean, there must be occasions where you surprise people with your response to a task.
Yes, hopefully, always.
Yeah. But this is part of the DNA. I get the impression this is the game. Yeah.
Otherwise, it would be boring.
Yeah.
I never thought of that as a challenge, to be honest. No. When you start as a young architect, like we did, we pretty much had nothing, right? I went out of school, I had no money. We just started working. Half a year later, somebody told us we should hire a tax consultant because that's what you need as a company, la la la. And so you don't have a portfolio. And of course, every new client or potentially new client asks you, did you do something like that before? And you cheerfully say no.
What's the precedent? Yeah.
And that's something I realized very early on, that I'm never going to sell my portfolio. I always sell my energy. Right? It's about a relationship. Otherwise, I still would do kind of small, little, whatever, So you're selling your energy and you're selling the trust people have in you.
Yeah.
And of course, now in a larger studio, in all my, my partner, in all our staff and wonderful team. But there's always a moment of a relationship between who doesn't need to be me, can be anybody. Like there's a relationship moment, and you sell your energy, and that's the trust which enables you to go somewhere. Yeah. If that magic moment doesn't happen, you're lost, right? The client wants to feel that you care. It's a moment of care. That's all there's to it. Yeah. You care or you don't care. If it's only functional or whatever, everybody can do it. If they feel you care for them, whether it's like a private project or like a large-scale governmental project, they want to see your passion, that you're really with them, and then you can go anywhere.
This is the generosity. I think this is what hearing you describe this process. It's I can see why people. It's irresistible. When you're able to apply this level of in a sense, understanding, because it's difficult for people to understand in some situations. I think particularly when with situations where you have to sort of tie into an existing plan for a project or whatever. So this, there must be, and the fact that you can still find a way through. But this again comes through the courage and being able to focus perhaps on the identity side of things rather than problem solving. This is an interesting thought. I think what you talked about. Process, in itself as being part of the goal. I think this isn't really a question, but it's more of a sort of observation. But I think this is, it doesn't surprise me to hear that this is how these projects become successful, because of the energy and the investment from
Yes, and you can terribly fail with that as well.
Yeah. I can imagine.
That's what it is, and that's part of the process. We're always talking about heavy projects, but of course, there's as many projects you might fail, or you learn something, or they the relationship is disturbed, or anything. And of course, for example, for us as a young studio, obviously we grew with smaller projects, which basically pretty much were like there's a person sitting on the table you kind of relate to, the owner, the private person you're doing a house for, and now over the years, of course, you grow into bigger kind of client. Mm-hmm. So corporate clients is a totally different animal. And you learn that was interesting, and we had a lot of hesitation to go, have corporate clients, because we had to understand that a private client, a person, always cares about the result. Mm-hmm. That's like their measurement for success. They want to have a greatest result. So it's close to our energy, because we want to have a great result. A bigger organization, the success is much more in having a good process where everybody in this chain of decision-making has a success. And the result is not unimportant, but it's not that important. So process is much more important. So you have to really invest in the process, rather than being like a bulldozer towards
the end goal.
Right? And that was a good learning, to be honest. That was a really good learning. It was painful, though.
Well, also because in many cases these processes are very linear, and you have to jump through the hoops to get to the next stage. That must be frustrating, I'd imagine.
But again, I think trust is the moment, and if your client understands that you're not like selling your vision no matter what, that you're kind of problem-solving oriented, and there's always obstacles along the way, so you always be kind of solution-oriented, and that's what we are. We're always like super solution-oriented, and we're always about partnership. So you can, together with the client, kind of get around these kind of obstacles. That creates a good bond, and that bond translates into, successful projects, hopefully. And if you have that bond, the client are fond of you, because they not only have a good project, but they have a good relationship, and so we like that situation, because again, it comes back to relationships, right? And good conversations. And I think that's what we like. So we have a lot of clients which, we work for many years, and they're good friends, and
they come back.
And they come back, and they refer us to other people they know. And so that's part of our success, of course,
And thinking about sort of more recent years, there's been huge disruption in terms of normality of life, if we dare call it that. But how have you responded as a studio to the challenges of the past, say, 4 or 5 years? In terms of, I'm thinking specifically with workspace projects, I would say, in terms of the challenges through the pandemic.
Absolutely. I think we always were, as a studio, quite open to adjust ourselves to whatever the market or the environment kind of offers us. And in a lot of respect, I think the pandemic kind of changed the way how we operate, not only in what we do, but in how we do it as well. So we took that as an opportunity to kind of redefine ourselves as a studio. We restructured the studio at the beginning of the pandemic, and made a promise to our team that we're going to get out better than we go in, and really turned the whole studio upside down in terms of how we organize things, how decision making is being done, creating a much more horizontal kind of next generation idea of a vision of a studio. Of course, in our projects, it changed quite a bit the way how our clients look at their projects, and especially in the workplace. Obviously, it's a good part of our business which right now condenses a lot of things we're discussing right now in our industry, right? So you have to create, from organizing desks to organizing knowledge and identity. I think it's a big jump. Right, so from facility management to creating a space where, of appropriation, of belonging, of constant learning, of constant change, without losing a strong identity. I think that's a beautiful moment. But of course, it's scary because as everything right now, everything is moving. So it's really hard. It's really hard to put your finger on it. And that's of course for a company which is, or like a client which is classically perhaps driven by a classic facility management kind of a perception. It is quite a transition, because it's not about furniture anymore. It's not that I'm gonna buy an armchair and then I'm doing new work. So here we go. And I think it's interesting because it expands dramatically our idea of what we do. So we are designing change. We're not only designing objects, but we're designing process. We're much more in consultancy. We're much more in post-operational evaluation processes, because we want to see the whole life cycle. It's a constant. What we design is not finished when we hand it over. It's the start of change. So you got to be very open in, this is going to hopefully change and transform into something you might not have foreseen. So it's not only learning for our client, it's learning for us. And so you want to do that or embed that in a constant conversation with your client, right? And that changes totally the way how you design things and your self-understanding of a designer. And I think it opens up a wonderful new world for us to expand to.
I can imagine that, and actually, thinking about the way that you work as a group, perhaps there was some benefit in this moment of reset, where people were forced to reconsider what it meant to be, and whether they would be present at work, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week. This whole kind of reassessment must have been a blessing in disguise, perhaps, for architects and for designers who perhaps were generally a little bit ahead of the curve, in terms of.
Are we?
Well, It's a good, we could discuss this for hours, but I mean, by definition, by being curious, by devoting time to people, by devoting time to behavior, obviously you're in a position where, potentially you can come with new input, I guess. But
we'll bring something to the table from our experience, and we see a lot. We always learned a lot from our collaborators, always. Whether it's like the furniture maker, and you stand there, it's not like about what they do in furniture making, but you see a company and you see how the company evolves, how they manage, how they do their processes. And we always had an open eye to learn from them, and you learn as much from your client. And if you lose that moment, I think you lose a lot, because that's the openness you need to have. It's not that you bring something and you teach them, and I don't believe in that. No. It is a constant learning process, and you want to be maximum open. Of course, you don't want to lose yourself because then you're suddenly part of their kind of but situation. You really need to listen, and that is the first start in always kind of re-evaluating a project, seeing whether you're still on course. But at the same time, you're always thinking about how does that apply to your own studio, right? And I like that a lot. Right, and of course it's as usual. Change is easy for the ones who kind of push change, and it's a little bit more difficult for the ones who
have to follow.
Kind of follow. So again, it comes back. Everything we learn in workplace comes painfully back to our studio, and we'd have to do the same exercise, right? And you, as I said, if it comes to you start to do your own mistakes, and you learn by mistakes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Complete change of scene now. I'm interested to think. Another thing that strikes me when I look at the projects that you've worked with is the physical materiality, the sort of haptic content. These physical surfaces, touch points, and I find it fascinating that you have this kind of material lab that you work with. How does that function as part of the approach? I mean, again, obviously, it's built up on curiosity, on a collection of samples, but also ties into this idea of using an archive, using a library, using a resource which is physical, because we spend so much time like this this. So it must be interesting to think how the role that plays in developing ideas.
Well, the reason we have a material lab is simply based on the situation that we have very diverse clients with very diverse typologies, with very diverse kind of stylistic expressions. So every project brings in its own world. So we're not like a type of studio where they have like one kind of set of aesthetics so it's like it's as wide as it gets, and as many projects we have, the more it adds to the material library. So we always like this, and since at the end, in our architecture and interior work, it's about physical spaces, and it's about creating. We like that moment of discovery in our projects, and so that of course has a physical touch point. So you wander, you see, you reflect, you touch, So that kind of led into a growing material library. And at one point, the whole thing was all over the place. And then we consolidated a couple of years ago, and we built this material lab. And we have 3 people only taking care of materials, collecting, sourcing, developing materials. Meanwhile, we do a lot of color material finishes projects for corporate clients, developing their color systems, developing new materials for their products. We're doing, carpet collections. So all that kind of becomes a quite exciting part of our studio, not only serving our projects, but becoming a project in itself and generating projects. And since we are in a quite interesting interface situation of being part of the building industry, having various experiences in all sorts of fields, I think we have a good position, especially for material-based companies, to kind of consult on them, because we know how the architects are thinking, and we know how the clients are, because it's so diverse.
Yeah, it gives you an advantage, I would imagine, being able to the fact that you're producing carpets as well. I mean, it's fascinating, because then you can have ownership over the textural.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, you research in sustainability and all these things, and it gives, let's say, economic things aside, right? It gives you an opportunity to rethink things which you otherwise just take as they are. to get in a conversation with your supplier to challenge them. We like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Look what we can do.
Yes. You know, or you know, have you thought about? And then you know, you'll start a conversation which leads you somewhere, whether that's a one-off or it's a product at the end.
Yeah.
And we like that energy in our project. So it's let's say it's less a strategic development rather than a very selfish moment of you know, creating a benefit for our project and the way how we work, to kind of serve our energy to create a very unique solution for our client. You know, and of course, giving them a moment of surprise, you might say, of a result which they haven't thought of before. Right.
Yeah. This is exactly what jumps out. I mean, this thing, and you know, when I see these sort of photos of your colleagues, you know, working with these materials, this is what really stands out. You know, to my, you know,
and of course, it's a magic moment for our clients coming to our studio
because
it's like a huge playground. It's a
Yeah.
huge playground. They love just being there for 2 days and doing materials.
Yeah, because it creates inclusion.
Totally ownership.
Yeah. Actually, inclusion is another thing that I find interesting, particularly because, I mean, you know, when we're so aware of neurodiversity now, you know, we're aware of people, you know, with a huge spectrum of needs, expectations, wishes, dreams. How does that work? You know, when you're dealing with a project with, let's say, again, a workplace with several hundred employees, how do you ensure that people feel included? You know, when you're involved in a workspace design, for example.
Yeah. Look, you never can do it by yourself. You know, I mean, this is like you're part of a bigger kind of change management process.
Yeah.
And the way how you set it up is very different for every company, because every company comes with a kind of own idea of how they communicate, how they understand leadership, etc. But typically, let's say, first of all, you have to have. It's good to have a group which ideally is self-motivated within the organization, which wants to promote change.
So allies, in a sense.
Yeah. You know, that's like a good moment, right? Then you have to identify stakeholders, and you might differentiate them. There's like some which are important for you for decision making, and you need to bring them on your side because they're in a hierarchy in the appropriate situation, right? Yeah. And some of them because they're like ambassadors within the team. They're good to multiply. You know, because that's how you're going to do that. You're not going to talk to a couple thousand people, right? And with that framework, you can start triggering down the organization. So pretty much the ambassadors are taking care of their group, and then you'll do workshops. And you know, again, that's the way how to do things. We just finished Beiersdorf last year, the worldwide, the global workplace concept, and did the headquarters in Hamburg. I have to say, for example, you know, that's a moment where you learn from your client. You know, it's really, really amazing how they did the change management process for the past 5 years. You know, and it was interesting to see because yes, it was a corporate decision to think about what new work, which is like a silly abstract term, you know, means for their way of working. Interesting enough, there was a group from the employees, self-motivated, created a group, and that always talks about great about this organization, that they like have all these kind
motivated to do this,
all these groups who kind of get the space to do something. So they came together and they actually initiated a new work group and started to think about how Beiersdorf should work and how they want to see their own work being organized.
And this was completely independent.
Independent. And that kind of came together, and then they did all these kind of workshops on department level, on team level, on the bigger scale, and that like a really from gamification to hands-on organizational workshops, really in depth. And then this grassroots initiative approached the board, and they got like twice, I think they did a global workplace New Work Day. So the whole company came together globally and had a virtual kind of sit together, listen to lectures, listen to us introducing what we're planning to do, opening it up for discussions and stuff. And that was a beautiful moment. And so interesting enough, and that's for me a good proof, when we now opened the project, I mean, it's a lovely project on many, on many levels. If I'm honest, and I like that, it's not so much about what we did, right? Because the process is so strong, then it's not about the design anymore. And I like that moment. you know?
It makes sense. I mean, and the fact that they were involved throughout
totally,
the process.
totally. And of course, you're never going to make everybody happy, right? It's like there's always somebody, not agreeing or something, but I think that was lovely to see. It's a great energy because they are part of it, and that's the learning. You want to make sure whatever it means in your organization, and again, every organization has a different kind of setup, a different psychology, so you'll have to respond differently, and that's one of the first things you need to figure out as long as you do it. The moment you don't do it, you have a very high likability that you're going to fail with the project.
Because of resistance. Yeah.
We had companies, you lost like 3-4 years, because you have to overcome that kind of moment of not being part of it. And people just don't like it because they were not part of it. They were not being asked,
You can't. But how can you design? I mean, was this circumstantial? I mean, it sounds like a stroke of luck that they understood. But presumably, maybe that's part of the approach, that people have to feel that their input is valid. The fact this group of people, felt that they were included. I mean, surely that's testament to the way you approach the project. I mean, I know you didn't set up this group.
No. That was all client. You supported, and of course, sometimes we do the change management as a consultant, and sometimes you're part of a bigger kind of a process. I think it comes back again to the same thing. Whatever you do, the people who are you doing it with want to feel that you mean it.
Okay, so it's authenticity.
That you mean it, that you care. It always comes back to care, right? It's like, do you care? Yes or no? And you feel it. We all know it. You go to a restaurant and you feel whether they mean it or it's just like a la la blah blah setup, right? It's a stage design, And so consistency of the way you act, the way how you experience it, the framework which you create. It always comes back to consistency, right? And whether you feel that somebody actually cares for you. Or it's just like, we're buying new armchairs and there's an arena, so we do new work, right? Nobody cares, right?
Absolutely.
So if I'm going to have an armchair and somebody sits there and reads and you're walking by and think, why is the guy not working? You lost it already.
Yeah,
right.
Because they haven't understood.
So you have to mean it, right? And so that goes for the process as well. If they feel that the company has an interest in not listening in to actually translate that one-to-one into what they're going to do, but to take their energy in to, discuss concerns, and there's always, valid concerns, and there's always fear. Good enough. We all have fear of change, including us, of course. It's
particularly when we spend so many hours.
It's human, right? And so you want to take these concerns seriously and try to answer them. Okay. And sometimes you just have to encourage people to just give it a try. Right? Because, that's what we all need, in our life. Somebody who kind of pushes a little bit and says it's going to be good.
Yeah, exactly. Which brings us back to how, taking this leap of faith, isn't it? You need ultimately to get your clients to leap with you, presumably.
Absolutely.
At some stage.
No.
Yeah.
And there's a million ways how to do this. Again, it comes to the client. Sometimes you're like the catalyst of things because you're like an outside kind of voice, so you can, it's easier to.
And you're not there all the time, of course, as well. So you can.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I love that. I love that process, and I think it's super important. Yeah.
Just a quick sort of thought, actually. Can you give us an example of a project which is really out of the ordinary? Something that's cropped up where you've perhaps questioned whether you were the right people for the job, or whether this was something that you were interested in doing, something where you've really had to say, okay, can we respond to this?
Yeah, it happens quite often to us, to be honest. But let's say our and we knew it in the minute when we got the project that this is going to be like our never going to do it in our lifetime probably again kind of situation. Is a couple of years ago, I got a call from a friend saying there's a project in Uzbekistan, and I don't know exactly what it is, but I think they really need an interior architect, and can you prepare a contract by tomorrow? I think it's an opera house, but it turned out to be that's not an opera house. It was the building for the government to do all their state events. So it's a big 2,000-seat auditorium with like political, welcoming state guests and all that.
But
kind of stuff.
Multifunctional.
So it's like a 40,000 square meter building at the core of Tashkent at the main square, right? And we won a pitch within a week. And we learned that the project had to be finished. There was like we flew there, and the building is really massive, and it was like, let's say, 50% done in the steel construction.
So it wasn't. It was a new build. It wasn't
a new build. It's a new build
Yeah.
designed by colleagues from Tashkent. So the architecture was designed locally, but it was in construction. Let's say, like half built. Let's say the steel construction, and that was like beginning of March, and then we learned that we had to finish the whole building by end of August the same year.
So 4 months or something.
Yeah, 5.5 months.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I mean, it's again, you throw yourself into a situation. I think we've been, as a studio, we've been like 22 people or something. I think the largest project we did so far was like a 400 square meter room or something. And so now we ended up in a 40,000 square meter project. And again, it's the magic moment of having a client in front of you. He looks at your proposal. He doesn't say a word for like 20 minutes. He looks up, looks you in the eye, and it's like, turnkey? And I say, of course. And you shake hands, and that's it. That was the contract, right? And then we went for it, and we ended up managing a site with 5,000 people. We brought in 1,600 workers from Germany alone. And it was like a massive situation, beautiful project. And not only was it done in time, it's of superb quality. We invented a lot of things in there. I think every company who was involved, and of course there's a lot of pain there's involved as well, it's like whatever. But everybody I know who was part of this thing, I think it was an adventure, and you learn something.
But, and presumably, this is national identity. This isn't company identity. This is the identity of a people.
And that was the brief, right? It was like about finding a language which is not a kitsch kind of redo of the glorious past. Uzbekistan has a beautiful building tradition of being the center of the Silk Road. So you have stunning Islamic architecture in Bukhara and so on. And not being Soviet, because they've been long enough part of the Soviet realm, and so they hated it. Although I have to say, the Soviet architecture in Tashkent is stunningly beautiful. Yes. But to find a contemporary kind of expression of something which relates to them, and it's not a copy of something else. And I think that was a beautiful moment. Beside being successful in delivering the project, a lot of people were so massively touched because they really felt that relates to them. This was really beautiful.
These were people within the government,
like a lot of
everybody
people. A lot of people. That was like the most beautiful moment. With all that kind of, we were working day and night, and there's like a million stories to tell. But even in that scale, in that kind of short period of time, to be able to create something which touches people, and that's ultimately what you want, right? You want something, again, comes back to value. People kind of resonate with,
They need to feel cared for. Ultimately.
That was the most beautiful moment, right? And beside the adventure, and beside all the stories and all the,
and presumably just the scale of being able to be involved in something which is really,
and that of course opened the door for many other things for us, because it at least made us ultimately get rid of being scared of something, because that you can't just.
No. It's beyond fear, almost.
It's like, okay, whatever you say, yes, we can deliver.
Fantastic.
If you are good, then, if you're really ready to do it, we know what it takes to do a fast track project. In many respects, I think that was interesting, because I've never been to Uzbekistan before. I've never been to Central Asia before. I never worked in an Islamic context before. We as an organization were, as I said, like in a total different scale of project. And to be able to pull that off, I think it was beautiful moment.
It sounds it.
So we always had these kind of moments in our career where something came up, and you're like, okay, let's just go. And when we started our studio in Shanghai, we've been working in China quite a bit, but we never had a studio there till like 8 years ago or something. Okay. And then I met a developer in Stuttgart, a Chinese developer in Stuttgart, introduced by another client. And he was looking at our portfolio, and he said, I love your work. Can you open a studio next week in Shanghai?
Next week?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we were like, next week might be a little bit tight, but next month we can do, right? And then we just went there, right? And went from there. And I that's what we like, that's like, and as I said, it's like, I think there's, we believe that you only can win in these kind of situations. Even if you fail, you win. You know.
This is incredible to hear. But it comes back to this same theme, and this same theme keeps coming. It's this curiosity, isn't it? There's some urge to respond, and the projects that you're describing are, you know, from one extreme to another, and every stage in between. It's fascinating. It's really, and I think from an external perspective, it's also very inspiring to think to get this sense of sort of humanity, and I think this again, this sense of being able to respond and, you know, and really take part. I think, you know, is another thing which is
No, I think we really like that. We really like the situation that there is something coming up, and you have to kind of get adjusted in a situation, you know, and the more unexpected it is for us, or a new perspective, it's lovely, because you learn something. It's an opportunity to expand your kind of vision of what the world could be, or what you are, you know. This always reflects back on yourself, you know, and that I thought was always an incredible privilege we have in general. I think in our profession, as it is a universal kind of language we can apply pretty much everywhere. So, you know, why don't take that moment and challenge yourself? And as I said, I think it at the end it's very selfish as well, you know, because it's a mean for you to learn about the world. And yes, we are curious. We are curious about how people live their lives, you know, what they think about it, you know, how they live, how they work, how they travel, how they enjoy themselves, how they spend their money. I love that, you know, and as diverse as it gets, you know, as
just one, I think, just perhaps to sort of to conclude, I think, you know, you spoke earlier on about coding, about, you know, this idea of being able to program something to take place, and obviously, you know, we're all hugely reliant on technology and on tools, you know, to develop. How is that impacting the way you're working now? I'm thinking particularly with AI tools, with augmented realities, virtual realities. How does that look in the studio?
We are introducing it and working with it massively. And interesting enough, not surprising enough, let's put it that way, from our Shanghai studio. Driven by our Shanghai studio. We're in the super baby shoes of all that, what's going to happen, and I think it's going to transform our industry massively, massively. And so I think it's really important that we'll all learn how to you know, or be part of that journey. Let's put it that way. You know, in a much more volatile market as we have it in Asia, you know, where constant change is like, you know, not even to discuss anymore. It's like, you know, people have dreams and they might change it like every week, and you sometimes have to redesign a project 25 times before it can get somewhere. You know, you have to find means to respond to that, and so artificial intelligence on one hand can be a tool to kind of help that, not to generate what you design, but to
iterate, perhaps,
get in a conversation with the clients, you know, and narrow it down and so on. There's of course a lot of tools which make your life a hell of a lot easier, right? So there's like a big field. It gives, of course, our clients the opportunity to express themselves and do a lot of the work by themselves. So a lot of projects that's not going to happen anymore.
So you predict that you will encounter more examples where people say, this is how we envisage this.
Of course, everybody can do it, you know.
Of course.
You just, like, if you have a little bit joy to experiment with it, you know, people, and it's happening already, you know, like in the real estate industry, a lot of sample apartments not going to get built anymore. They're not going to get designed by agencies like us anymore, because, you know, it's good enough to do like a funky Midjourney kind of visualization of what it could be, and that's it, and everybody loves it because it's so dreamy, you know. No, in a serious point, I think we'll see a shift in what kind of projects we're doing, because a lot of projects will be accessible from non-designers with these tools, not to an extent to actually get it built, but in a creative moment, which once more questions, you know, who we are as a designer, as a profile, and what kind of distinguishes us from anybody else, right? And then, of course, I think the whole creation moment will be transformed, because these tools, not into much that they design for you, but I think they make potentially decision-making processes much quicker. You know, you can explore many more different routes, be, you know, daring, or let the machine be more daring, and let that inspire you or your client. So less time.
That sounds fascinating, because if you're able to let go with these tools,
well,
this was
like
you have to.
Because you have literally you have like a level where you can kind of control the craziness of the result, right?
A slider, sort of. Wow.
And so that's kind of interesting. And of course, it takes away a lot of work, which is repeating work. You know, like let's say we were doing a couple of years ago, we were doing luxury residential projects and designing like 650 apartments in a tower. You know, it's just twisted, so like most of the apartments are like different, and you have to in a very intense process between architectural vision, MEP needs, structural needs, and making spaces which are sellable and livable. That's not gonna happen anymore. You'll put that into an algorithm, and this is gonna happen, and you control it, and it's gonna be done. Workplace projects, will be massively supported by AI in the way how you organize and lay it out. You'd still need to control it, but what it means is, I think there's a group of people who can use those tools, and they're on top of things, and the rest is gone. This is radical, but I think this is what's going to happen. And of course, they're going to find other ways, as like any new technology is going to create new fields of things. But I think it's going to change dramatically how we design, what our understanding of design process is, our tools, the way studios work. And we're only seeing like the very, very bottom of it. And if you look in all the developments ahead, it's crazy. I mean, even today, we can create out of a still image a video sequence. And this is like 1 year after the first seeing of OpenAI, right? So what are you going to see in 5 years? So interesting enough, everything we thought will be future-proof. Like 2 years ago, you would have said to your kid, learn coding, because only the one who codes will survive. Coding was the first one to begin.
Yeah.
So this is interesting.
It's thought-provoking, isn't it? Yeah. Could you see yourselves designing virtual worlds?
Yeah, we do that. Yes, interesting as a different kind of situation. Although I have to say, me personally, I love physical space. Yeah, I just love stuff. Yeah, too much. Yes, right. Yeah. But hey, that's why it's a larger studio, and you have so many voices and so many interests and so many kind of energies, and that's beautiful to see. So it's not about me, right? And I like it as an intellectual kind of challenge, because I think it's pretty silly that everything we see in the virtual world, and I might not have the total overview, kind of is like a funky rip off the reality. So the whole promise of freedom of gravity and all these kind of things, which define our physical building doesn't exist, because it's pretty much the same thing, right?
Sampling, isn't
it?
Yeah.
And so there's a curiosity of what that could mean, and I think everybody's working on it. So,
And the thing that strikes me is, again, coming back to senses, you can never, well, not yet, experience the same sensorial stimulation within a virtual environment in terms of, the particularly with, think about it, acoustic. I mean, there are sort of, tools to simulate acoustic environments, for example. But I think it's I think it's interesting to think how that will progress in terms of immersive.
I think it's super fascinating. I definitely want to be part of it. Yeah. It's not about saying, oh, this is so much better than the other one. I think both experiences are valid, and life always goes like in a curve, right? So the more we accelerate it, and the more we kind of digital, the more we kind of looking for the real thing and touch it again. So that's why we're doing all these resources in the countryside now, because it's about, again, we want to, and after COVID, we want to get back to in real contact. So it's all about encounters. It's all about building communities as a counterpoint to the alienation and the acceleration and the digitalization of our urban life, right? Yeah. And
we're craving this.
Yes, and it's going to turn around again. So it's never about creating oppositions or something. It's about understanding our needs in a changing world. And probably offering various answers rather than the one with has the truth, because I don't think that there is.
No.
That.
That's fascinating. Peter, thanks for joining us today. It's been fascinating to hear more about your work and really get a sense of your personality. It's been great. Thank you. This has been Hub Talks. I'm Jack, and I'll see you in the Hub next time.